Hello, my friends. This is The Art of Prepping. I hope you guys are doing good today. So when I look around the world, I see a lot of people get too focused on feeding themselves with quote unquote food and not feeding themselves with other elements, other forces to build themselves up. So there is, in my opinion, too much focus on the physical body and less on the mind, less on the spiritual matters. And so what are some other ways, some non-food, quote unquote, ways to feed yourself? I think this is really interesting because we are in a time period in history where there's a lot of just spiritual waning going on. It seems like people are less and less spiritual. There are people who are still very spiritual. But when you look at the culture as a whole, you see a lot less than you did 10, 20 years ago. And it's not to say that there's like more atheist or more this or that. It could be. And that's probably true. But I think it's more about people are trying to define themselves less and less within spiritual matters. And they rely less and less on these forces to carry them through and to build themselves up. So I want to go over a few of these things. I'm going to try to go over 10 items, but if I don't get through them all, I'll just do a part 2. But the first is hope. Hope. I just recently was just chatting with a friend about this. You know, it is of my perception that hope, it can be something that we can embody and we can generate, but I think the majority of it is spiritual. It's a mental thing, sure, but there's also a very large spiritual aspect. And I think that we're not able to tap in and to access hope unless it's given to us by God. So it's like a gift from God, hope. And that's why when you read the Bible, you know, the good news, I mean, that's all about giving you hope. That's why it's a gift to read the Bible and to actually understand it as the way that it was meant to be understood, and not in some kind of radical context. So hope is something that can carry you. It's certainly a force. That's why I think it's more of a spiritual force than a man-made ideology or thought, even though it can be a thought, but it really is so much more. Hope is putting your trust into something because you have a type of belief that it will all work out, right? Work out for the best, work out for you, work out for them, work out for everyone, whatever. And sometimes we have misplaced hope, but if our hope comes from God, then it's not misplaced. I think that what's misplaced is the hope that we try to generate ourselves, which is typically pretty empty, because a lot of times our hope is based off of material things, you know, things that really are not that important in the big picture of things. And so, big difference, though, between spiritual and man-made hope. Another thing that feeds us, and this is the big one, really. You know, I kind of thought maybe I should just wait until the end to do this, but I'm just going to mix these all up so it's kind of more fun that way. But this is love. Now, love gets talked about a lot. It's in movies. People tell each other almost, you know, on a regular basis, at least some couples do, that they love each other. And some of this is sincere. Some of it is just going through the motion. In some ways, the word and the term love has been watered down. It really has been watered down. Now, on a human level, we experience love as this like connection and this yearning to either be with someone or to help someone. It's a deep compassion as well. It's almost like this this connection, though, that we want to almost like embody the essence of what it is to be moral with a person. And this is not to be confused with obsessions and how you have some people who they get into something and it's more than just liking something. They think they love it, but it's more an obsession. It's out of balance. And so we're not talking about that. We're talking about real love where your intentions are to do the right thing. But I think there's even a much larger definition, though, which is very hard for me to verbalize right now. In a spiritual context, you have God, at least in the Christian world, we look at God as the definition of love. And it's like, wow, he is the author of creation. And obviously love's going to come from the author of creation. But God is supposed to be, by definition, among other things, because he's unlimited, so he's pretty much everything in some way, but he's certainly love. And so it's so hard to define, but yet we all know on a deep level what it is. I think it's really interesting and mysterious how that works out. But love is probably the strongest element for most people, for sure, especially when you look at it spiritually. To feed us spiritually, emotionally, and even physically, love is very powerful. And just to kind of create some contrast here and to talk about kind of the opposite of love, it's typically referred to as anger or hate, right? But I honestly think you could go further with that and say fear. I think that fear or something related to fear could be a really good opposite to love. And so why is that? It's because you have the absence of what you consider and you hold precious and of value. And you fear not having that when you don't have it. And so love is an abundance. And I see that right now at the time of making this video, there's a lot of fear. And there's certain groups that are pushing fear about certain topics. The mainstream media is very good at this. They do this all the time for, years and years now. That all they do is push out fear. So you could actually make an argument that they are kind of the opposite of what really Christians are called to do, which is supposed to be to love one another, right? And so the big media is not loving one another. They're trying to drive each other apart through division and fear. So we've touched on hope, love, and I think that really charity comes next. Now, some people like to bundle love and charity together. I can kind of see why. Because it all comes back to setting yourself aside and looking at someone else's needs and giving them attention. But it's also giving of yourself, imparting a part of yourself in the aid of others or in the service of others, which is very Christian-like. So there's, love and charity are very much, in my opinion, kind of intertwined. They're kind of interlinked or enmeshed in a lot of ways. The beautiful thing about charity is that you can see it on every level when you demonstrate charity to other people. So we can see, though, that on a physical level, when you do charitable things, when you volunteer and you give of yourself, almost in any way, it actually really increases those various neurotransmitters in your brain that make you feel good. Those feel good types of hormones, neurotransmitters, various chemicals. And we can get into a lot of detail if you want in another video, but I'm just going to keep it really simple in this video. But it helps you on a physical level. It reduces stress. It does all kinds of things, right? So on a physical level, charity, giving of yourself, volunteering is amazing. It's one of the healthiest things you can do because we're built to serve each other. We're built to love each other. On an emotional level, it does the same thing. It does amazing things. On a spiritual level, it's just unbelievable as well because you're fulfilling your purpose. And that's kind of what I want to talk about next is purpose. It's hard to go through your day if you really don't have any kind of goalpost to work toward. If you don't even know what you're here for, it's very frustrating and you don't have direction. So you do need purpose. Some people find purpose in doing certain things that people tell them to do. Other people create their own purpose. Some people try to find it in a spiritual way, and then they go from there. You kind of have to figure that out on your own. Some people, they know that it's very obvious. It's an obvious thing for them. Like it's obvious that this is their purpose, or right here in the now, they're supposed to be doing this. And that's what I would encourage you is maybe instead of getting so lost in these massive grand pictures, these big picture views of your life and these big ideas of purpose, pull back and look right now in your life. In this very moment, what should you be doing? Because that probably is your purpose. And of course, your purpose can change throughout the day and throughout the week and throughout the years, but that's okay. Sometimes you just need to go with what's going on right now and not be so worried about next year when it comes to purpose. Let's talk about faith. Faith sometimes gets broken down in different definitions about types of beliefs and trust and a yielding towards certain ideology. And there's like this inherent bias toward certain ways of thinking. But on a spiritual level, faith is more like a surrendering. And it's a comfort. It's a way to connect with God, especially once again, if you're a Christian, because I'm a Christian and these are all mostly Christian ideas. But you don't have to be a Christian to realize that you use belief and faith throughout your day. And so even if it's not on a spiritual, manner, even if it's not spiritual, you still have emotional and physical faith that you deal with. And so how much do you trust yourself? How much do you trust God? How much do you trust the process of life? Because people who don't have faith, they don't trust themselves, obviously, or others typically. And the world is a scary place. The world is very dangerous for those people. Now, the world is dangerous overall. I'm not going to say it's not. But it's that much more for those people with no faith. It's a very abstract and a lot more unknowns, right? There's unknown variables everywhere. There's very few constants or known elements when you have no faith. You just don't have yourself grounded. Now you may say, hey, I'm a scientist and there are absolutes and this is what these are. And you can say that and maybe that some of those are true. But I'm talking about you still have faith to come to those conclusions because you have standards in how you do science. And so you have to trust the process to get to those conclusions. And so some people say, no, it's not faith or trusting anything. There's just a process and you follow it and you get the outcomes. But once again, you still have to trust that the process is wholesome, that it's correct, that it's based on fact. And so there's a lot of push and pull when it comes to these things. Some people want science to be completely devoid of anything else. And other people say that, wow, everything is intertwined. And you can't just have science by itself and nothing else, because we're human. And the world doesn't work in a vacuum. Things are not sterile in the way that certain scientists want it to be. I think it's interesting because you do have science that talks about, well, these are the outcomes that happen in a lab, in a environmentally controlled laboratory environment, right? And then a lot of times those same results in a lab that's like in a controlled environment are very different than what happens in the real world. So, even scientists fall victim to their own bias and their own type of faith, and this is what's kind of it's almost kind of like laughable on various levels. It really is that you have atheists that would deny that they have no faith. No, they do have faith. They just have faith not to believe in certain types of religions or gods or whatever. But to say that to be an atheist, that there is no faith or belief, well, that's just ridiculous because they believe in atheism. And they say, no, atheism is just the void of belief. But you still have to believe in a void of belief to come to that conclusion that there's a void. So it's just a bunch of nonsense. People will talk in circles, but if you step back and listen, you can figure out there's a lot of nonsense out there. You got to be careful. So we talked about hope, love, charity, purpose, faith. Let's touch base now real quickly on moral truth. Wow. A lot of people believe that there are no absolutes, that everything is somewhat abstract. Everything is kind of subjective. It just depends on your perspective. I hear this all the time. I think it's pretty much nonsense. Some people try to make a case that we're in the matrix, that we're not even real. This is all a delusion. This is all a dream. I mean, I don't know if it's just the attempt of some people to not hold themselves accountable for certain things, or to find an excuse not to believe in anything, or they're so fearful just to live life that they have to find some type of out so they can convince themselves that none of this is real. I don't know. It is kind of disturbing though, but to have constants in your life and to recognize those is very beneficial. It's called building a foundation, right? You have to start somewhere. And if you have no constants in your life, everything is upside down. Everything is always up in the air. So this idea that we can't have anything that's standardized, that nothing is like really real, it's all made up in our head, I think that's complete bunk. I mean, just the ability to think and to be aware of our environment says that something's going on. But some people want to say some pretty bizarre things, once again, to try to get away from the, I guess we call it, the process of making choices, right? And being accountable for those choices. Some people can't handle that. Some people are so stubborn and they want to live in certain ways so much, they'll find any excuse to justify it. Discovery. Discovery is another element, another force that's very powerful. This could be physical discoveries, mental discoveries, emotional discoveries, certainly spiritual discoveries. And I don't think that there's going to be any kind of limit anywhere ever in what can be discovered. I think because we have an infinite God, there's an infinite number of discoveries to be made. And so I find that really mind-blowing. I think it's super interesting. I mean, people sometimes think it's amazing what science discovers every year. You know, we probably haven't scratched the surface, and literally we haven't, because if there's infinite number of things to discover, we really haven't ever scratched the surface. We're always just kind of in the infancy stage, which is super interesting. Memories. Memories can be pretty powerful and can be a source of motivation, can be a source of ideology. It can also taint you in bad ways, but it also can be very good for you. It can sometimes provide clarity. Sometimes you look back and you can think about things in ways that things connect and you understand more. You can expand sometimes your understanding through memories. It's not good, though, to live in your memories, but sometimes you can pull from your memories. And I think that's why we have them, is to pull and learn from our past so we can have a better future and to understand how to be more in the moment, how to get more out of our life, how to avoid suffering and injury and pain and all that. So there's a real reason why we have memories. Some people say, well, that's because it's part of you. You know, it's part of your sense of self. You have to have memories or you don't have a sense of self. And I can see that maybe like on a mental and physical level, but I don't know how much that applies to us spiritually. Because I think we're way more, obviously, much more than just a collection of memories, right? So moving on through the list here, I want to just highlight the next force, and that is the will to live. The will to live. It's pretty powerful in some people. In other people, it's not very strong whatsoever. Now, some people, when they hear the word will, they think about choice, right? You have free will. You have the option to choose this or that. The will to live is that choice to continue the journey in this level of existence here on earth. The will to move forward, I think, is very strong in those who literally have more faith and hope. And it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Someone also full of love will have much more will because they'll have much more reinforcing who they are, their sense of self, and who they are is a lot more. It's made up of a lot more than someone who is lacking, faith, hope, love, and someone that's not charitable, someone that's very much focused on themselves, I believe, are more limited. Those type of people are more limited in the big picture because they haven't expanded out and connected with other people. They haven't built themselves up at all. The more inward that you stay, and I'm not talking about in every aspect of this, but I'm talking about in your service to others, or I guess in this case, the lack thereof. But if you don't really ever go out and you do no service to others, you only serve yourself, then you will have a very immature sense of self. Because once again, we are called to serve each other and to love each other. And if all you do is serve yourself and love yourself, and loving yourself is not a bad thing, but there's a lot more than just us, right? So there's a fine line here. Now, some people have personalities that are very outgoing, so this is very easy to connect with other people. And some people are extremely shy, very introverted, and that shyness can really cause problems. So it is a struggle for some people to do various things, to have various mindsets. But that's what I want to kind of close with, though, is mindset. Perception, mindset. How do you go about thinking about what you think? it's kind of a circular thing that can get a little crazy to think about it, just thinking about thinking. But when you step back enough and try to like analyze what you can analyze, analyze what is conscious to analyze, because a lot of stuff is going on under the surface. There's no doubt about it. We have an unconscious, I believe, and there's a bunch of stuff going on. I mean, we have to have that because we need a filter, because the world is it's just so much, there's so much going on. It's so full of information, so much stimuli, that if we didn't have a filter, we couldn't function. There's just too much information to process. So how we perceive the world, and some of this is really by habit, our habitual choices. Our perception is huge here on earth, huge. And the crazy thing about this is that we can change our way that we perceive the world. It's not very easy, especially when you're an adult, but you can make changes over time, incrementally, and before you know it, over a course maybe of a few years, you can really see the world differently. You can have a different default in terms of your emotional states, your affect. So these things are real. You can find yourself in a totally different state of being because of your perception. And this is a very large driving force. This can really feed us because it creates a baseline from everything else to build from. So I think that's really interesting. I think, people, can talk about that all day long and it wouldn't get boring because it's so deep. That topic of mindset, the framework of what goes on in our heads. And you can make the argument that there's probably, most likely there really is, in my opinion, in my belief about how things work. There's probably an intellect that's outside. It's probably our soul. Our spirit, the essence, or whatever you want to call it. But that is probably our true intellect. And there's a lot of people who believe that our spiritual self interacts through the mind so that we can interact with this 3D world. So our spiritual self is using the body as a vessel, including the brain, to interact with the world. I think it's very cool to think about that. And I think that's probably more true than not. So with all this, hopefully this was somewhat interesting, a very different kind of conversation here, different chat than normal, but what do you think about all this? You have any thoughts? Do you have any comments? Feel free to leave your comments in the comment section, of course. If you like this video, feel free to share it and give me the thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, feel free to do it. Hey, thanks so much for checking the video out. I'll catch you later.